All right, everyone. This has been a long time coming. I announced Utah Aviate podcast probably about 8 months ago. So we have begun. Finally got all the setup and some people planned out for who we're going to interview and what we're going to talk about. But to start off, let's just introduce what this is and what we're going to be going over. So yeah, we're Utah Aviate. We are located in Nephi, Utah, kind of a small town, but we are growing very, very fast with our flight training. So that's what we mainly do is flight instruction so people can get their licenses and learn to fly their airplanes so that they buy or want to do this as a career, or they're just doing it for fun and it's a goal of theirs in getting their pilot's license. We offer a wide range of training events, starting with our private pilot. Then you can move on to do your instrument training and your commercial training. And we do also offer CFI or certified flight instructor and CFII, which is certified flight instructor instrument. So basically all you would need in order to, either jumpstart a career in aviation or, you're just doing this for fun and leisure, you can do it all with us. So that's what we do at Utah Aviate. But for this podcast, what we're trying to accomplish is be able to inform everybody on, the different topics of aviation. We're hoping to, help future students that want to join our flight school or any flight school. We're wanting to bring in a lot of aviation professionals in order to give a wider scope of what's going on in the aviation community. So whether you're a pilot, own airplanes, want to get into piloting, or just have an interest in aviation topics, this is the right podcast for you. So excuse the production setup. We are just starting. We're kind of working out all the kinks, but hopefully we can provide a good content for everybody. But I myself, I'm my name's Matt. I'm one of the owners of Utah Aviate. I've been flying for about 4 years, almost five. I'm coming up this year. I've always had a dream of aviation, always wanted to be a pilot. Always, I like looking up in the sky and seeing the airplanes, but this wasn't my first career choice. I've been through, a lot of different sales opportunities from car sales to real estate. And then, just a couple years ago, ended up getting into aviation. I started my flight training down in Houston with a flight school down there. Flew out of Ellington Airport and yeah, started there. I did all my training in about 6 months. It took me 6 months to get from a zero-time private pilot student all the way to instructor. Had a few little holdups here and there, as you can expect with aviation or flying in general. But I was able to do it. And then I got a job with a Sears Training Center, Modern Pilot down there in Houston. They're great. Had an awesome time with my students there. I did about 1,000, or 700 to 1,000 hours with them in about a year time frame, and then ended up wanting to move back to Utah since I'm originally from here and my family's originally from here, and started this flight school. So we started up in September of 2023, and it's been very busy since then. But that's just a little bit about me. Let's talk a little bit about the podcast here. So, like I said, there's a lot of categories that we want to cover in the podcast from, like I said, some training events. I hope to have some sort of knowledge-based information each podcast, hopefully tied into, as you can see, we have another microphone here. We don't have a guest today, but later on in our future episodes, we're going to have guests in all ranges of aviation. So, and we're going to tailor our training event to whatever that person may be involved in. Obviously, if it's nothing that we can tie it to, we'll just still have a training event, hopefully help people, learn a little bit more about, what it takes to become a pilot. So it's not an easy task becoming a pilot. It's a lot of time, a lot of dedication, and a lot of studying. So it takes a lot of time to get into aviation. And we're hoping to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. With the training, we also hope to get into a little bit more of, the knowledge base of aviation. I get asked every single day when someone finds out I'm a pilot, which happens often. There's obviously the joke that if there's a pilot in the room, you're going to know who it is. So, but yeah, I get asked questions every day about what it's like, the, safety aspects and the, what you see on the news and the different types of airplanes I like and what it takes to get into flight training, all of those things. So, we're going to get into kind of the knowledge aspect of aviation. And then, like I mentioned before, we're going to have a bunch of different type of aviation professionals here. People have just been flying for, many, many years to, airline pilots, military pilots, jump school pilots, aircraft owners, mechanics, basically try to hit all of the little careers that you can make out of aviation. And then a big part of this is going to be getting into the news of aviation. That's one of the bigger questions that I get is, you see stuff on the news from, airplane crashes to, hirings or airliners or all these big news updates that you see. Hopefully we can dive in a little bit about those, kind of go over what they actually are from a perspective as a pilot or from the perspective of another pilot, and hopefully give a little bit more clarity to those type of situations. So, and then obviously we're going to go over updates with Utah Aviate as we are growing as a business. We have a lot of future plans for the company and we'll be doing updates there as well. So, but let's start off, since we don't have a guest here, I don't obviously have them to introduce. Something that I've been asked frequently over the past couple weeks is the safety of flying, mainly this kind of the general aviation aspect of flying. So when I first got into it, there's a lot of excitement of being a pilot, opportunities of being a pilot, but everybody asks, oh, are you going to be safe flying around in these little aircrafts? Our plane that we fly is a Diamond DA-40 NG. It's a four-seater airplane. It's a prop, propeller driven. So, and everybody looks at those as being kind of a death trap, which is not the case. Aviation or flying in general is still one of the safer forms of transportation. And depending on how you go about your flying and go about the situations you put yourself in, it can still be relatively safe. Obviously, there's a risk factor in everything that you do, even jumping into your car, but flying, there's a little bit added risk, but at the same time, if you're safe, you take precautions, it doesn't have to be dangerous. So, but yeah, back to the question I get asked. So over the past couple weeks, we've obviously seen some pretty major airplane accidents. I don't like necessarily talking about accidents, as I fly every day. I don't want that on my mind, but that's something of interest in the past couple weeks. Obviously you've probably seen on the news the, accident in Washington, D.C., or, the helicopter accident that just happened a few days ago. It just seems like every day you jump online, there's another airplane, crash somewhere in the country. So I went ahead and looked up a bunch of information on this to see kind of how it compares to, let's say, the past couple years of accidents. And I found it interesting that basically, so to like break down, and I'll add this to the video, but year over year, there's always, they can pull all the stats from all the accidents that has happened throughout all aviation. So far this year, we have 271 accidents. Obviously, in the first 3 months, not counting April, there's 256 accidents. And then if you look at year to year, 2004, there was 1,468 accidents, 2023, 1,484 accidents, 2022, 1,544 accidents. So, it seems like a big number. Now that doesn't always mean there's fatalities. Most of the time there isn't a fatality in an accident. It's actually pretty rare, at least from my findings, that there is a fatality. Most of the time it's just, someone gets harmed or, everybody walks away perfectly fine. But it seems like, if you're looking at the news, there's a lot of accidents this year. So January, there were 75 aviation related accidents. 2024, there was 80. 2023, there was 90. 2022, there was 82. 2021, there was 74. 2020, there was 89. That's, basically the last 5 years, 4 years. And so far, January was one of the lowest for 2025. February, there was 94. In 2024, there was 94. 2023, there was 82. 2022, there was 99. 2021, there was 96 or 90, sorry. In 2020, there was 96. So, same thing looking at March. We're very low in March, 87 compared to the previous years. You had 113, 106, 114, 114, and 78. And then April, so far there's a 15. And each of those years in April, you had 112, 112, 118, 118. So, and then 2022 is kind of an anomaly year. There wasn't as much flights going on. Looking back, that's kind of the COVID era. So there wasn't a whole ton of flights, or I guess in general aviation, a lot of things were, put on hold. So, but just going back the last 4 years, we are lower than most of them. So, and then taking like the averages. So from 2006 to 2024, um, there was an average of 85 in January, 90 in February, 114 in March, 124 in April. So I'll just take those months since that's all we have for this year. So we're below average on January at 75. We're on par, I guess, for February. We're below average in March at 87 compared to 114. And then in April, we're only at 15, which the average is 124. So, looking at all of those accidents, we're actually much lower than uh, than the past years, basically, back until 2006. There's obviously some low months, some high months, but, comparing that to, I pulled another piece of data. And just so you know, all that data that I pulled is from the NTSB, which is the national, it's a government website. They're the ones who actually go and investigate all of the accidents and whatnot. But they also estimated, so in 2024, we obviously don't have 2025 updates, but in 2024, there were an estimated 16.8 million flights in the U.S. airspace. And year over year, there's a 500,000 increase in flights. That's not hours, that's not airplane, that's the amount of flights that are going out. So when you take these numbers and you look at how many flights go out each year, um, that's quite a bit. The FAA provides services to 45,000 flights just in one day. And that's not including, the general aviation where FAA services aren't provided. So you can go fly every day without getting in contact with the FAA, which is your ATC, or air traffic control, and you're not necessarily needing any of their services that they provide. So yeah, when you look at it, 45,000 flights a day, and in a year total, you're having about 1,400 accidents. It's pretty low. And then for this year, we're probably going to be closer to that 17 million range, or 50,000 flights a day, because it has increased every year. Yeah, you get, it's a basically less than 1% of, airplanes going out. So in terms of safety, there's very little accidents compared to the amount of flights that we do. So, and just at Utah Aviate alone, we probably do, we average probably around 100 hours a month in the airplane. That's probably about 100 different flights. If we're saying, about an hour to 1.3 hours flight. So yeah, you're looking at like 80 to 100 flights a day. It's a lot of flights just for a flight school like us. So yeah, looking at all those numbers, kind of putting it in perspective, I think it's safe to say that, this year has actually been a lot better than most years with the increased amount of flights. And then also, I think it's good to take into consideration the amount of new pilots that are coming into the marketplace. So, I guess they say right now there's 490,000 certified pilots. It's hard to keep track of which ones are active, which ones are actually flying. But, almost 500,000 pilots in the country. And they see about 14,000 to 15,000 new pilots every year. So, also taking into new pilots into effect, you would think with the increase of demand of new pilots or student pilots, private pilots, there would be a lot more accidents. But there really isn't. We're seeing a decrease in accidents. If you take from, I guess it's 1980 to today, there's been a decrease in aviation related accidents since then every year. So, which is great, you know. But yeah, in terms of answering that question to most people, I say it's relatively safe. You know, there's always issues that can be involved. Looking back at those reports that I mentioned from the NTSB, most of the incidents that happen in aviation are pilot error. Unfortunately, it's pilot error, not like engine malfunction or something like that. So I think, you know, when you're considering the amount of accidents that happen, I think it was 80% of them being pilot error. I think that just comes, we just need additional training, additional, you know, proficiency in airplanes, being careful what situations you put yourself into when flying. So those are all things that we consider every day. Now it comes a little bit easier being in a flight school because I don't want to be putting a student pilot into a situation that might be hard to learn. But I think, you know, in aviation in general, I think is a better rule of thumb to follow, where we really should be considering what characteristics we're putting ourselves in the airplane in. So I see a lot of things on the news. I obviously am up to date on all of the accidents that happened. You know, I think nowadays where it's more publicized and some of the accidents have been pretty severe, I think, you know, we'd still take into consideration that we're at a low of the amount that has happened. So, you know, obviously do your own research. That's just pulled from the government website and you can all figure that out on your own. But it's good to be aware of what you're seeing on the news or what you're seeing out there on social media or whatever versus what's actually happening in aviation. So kind of switching sides here from that, you know, going over, I also, another question I get asked is aviation a good career for me, or is it a good time to get into aviation? We've obviously seen a huge, you know, downturn of how many people are being hired and people moving up in the aviation community and, you know, all of those things. But when you're I obviously do the research on those because people coming into the flight school are mainly wanting to do this as a career, and you know they don't want to get into the situation of spending all of this money into possibly not having a job when they get out of it. So first I want to talk about kind of the process of becoming let's say an airline pilot, because that's what a lot of people strive to do. That's what the goal is. So um, now, I'm not an airline pilot, but I've heard this from a lot of airline pilots and then just what the research shows. So, like I mentioned before, there's probably about 14,000 pilot, 15,000 pilot increase each year. So that's people who go from zero time to getting a pilot certificate, which they are only calculating in the private pilot or higher. So there's some lower licenses you can get. But um, and then let's see here. Basically, the difficulties of getting into aviation, you run into the cost of it. So the average cost of flight training is around 90 to $140,000 just for the training. So a lot of people, oh, that's a crazy amount of money. I mean, just to run the airplane alone and fuel is a big chunk of that. So airplanes are not cheap to run. It's not like driving your car. They are expensive. They cost a lot of money. And then fuel, you burn a lot of fuel. So you're putting a lot of money into fuel. And then you obviously got to pay for your instructor on top of that to get you certified. As much as people want to do it for free, they don't. You know, you got to pay the bills. You got to, you know, put food on the table and obviously pay for the training that you went through previously. So in terms of the pathway that you take, so you start off at a flight school, you get your private pilot license, then you work towards your instrument license. So your private pilot's 40 hours, your instrument license probably another 40 hours, and then you got to get your commercial license. And this is where a big holdup goes with people trying to get their path to airliners. That's the word I'm looking for. So when you get your commercial license, it's not just that doesn't allow you to go fly for an airliner. All the commercial license does is allow you to get paid for flying. Everything prior to that, you cannot get paid. So, in order to get your commercial license, you've got to have 250 hours. So, a lot of that chunk there that you have to do is just time building. So you got to get into an airplane and just go fly. It's a lot of hours, a lot of time in the airplane. The quicker you get it done, the quicker you get commercial. So once you get your commercial license and you do the training for that, then you can then get hired on to fly for someone. And then we run into the issues of insurance. So insurance kind of dictates who you're allowed to hire, what hours are allowed to be in your airplane. So like for us, our minimum's 300 hours. So you got to have at least 300 hours in order to fly our airplane as an instructor. So some people it's 250, some it's 500, some it's 750. So depending on what route you want to go, which most people end up going the instructor route. They teach people, they get paid to fly, they can instruct and, work towards their time for the airliners, which right now is about 1,500 hours. So, and then once you hit that, then you got to go through all the hiring process of, finding an airliner you want to fly with. Those are the difficulties that you run into trying to get into aviation. So again, start with private pilot, 250 hours to commercial, and then another up to 1,500 hours for your ATP rating. So to fly for an airliner. Then, so going back to, the training and hiring of becoming a pilot. So you go through all that time, all that money in order to become a pilot. Is it going to be worth it in the end? So one, I get asked, can I get hired when I hit my 1,500 hours? Yes, I think you can. There's definitely still a demand. Now, the past, I guess, 4 years has been really crazy on hiring. All the airliners were in desperate need of pilots. There's not that situation that we were running into before. So now what we have is it's kind of mellowed out, but there's still a very big need of pilots. So pulling up some reports from the airliners and whatnot, over the next 20 years, they're going to need about 123,000 pilots over that 20 years. So there's actually a shortage worldwide. They're going to need 674,000 pilots worldwide. Um, and then in the next 5 years, they're expecting about 17,000 pilots to retire because there's a mandatory retiring age for airliners at 65 years old. They're able to see who's turning 65 over the next 5 years. That's 17,000 pilots. So, basically they're going to need to hire, almost 1,500 pilots a month, or a year over the next 5 years. So quick math, don't correct me on that one. But yeah, so there's definitely a need for pilots. And then you run into there's regional airliners and then there's major airliners. Everybody that's at a regional most of the time ends up wanting to move to a major. So as people retire from the majors, they're going to need to pull people from the regionals, and then that creates the demand for people moving into the regionals. So I don't think that's going down anytime soon. I think there's always going to be a need for a pilot. It just comes down to what you can do to improve your resume, your time building, and what type of airplanes you fly, what type of ratings you have. It will all help towards that. So is it worth it though? The pilot interest has obviously risen significantly over the past couple years. I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, if I remember correctly, the average pay for a starting pilot was like 50 to 75,000 a year. The average starting pay now has increased to 100,000 to 150,000 a year. And then the average major airline pilot is making 200,000 plus a year. So yeah, your startup cost, you're investing in yourself, in flight training and all of the time building that it takes, uh, for a potential high outcome and in your income. So, there's a lot of benefits once you get to the airliner. On top of pay, there's a pretty clear career growth path. Once you do join an airliner, they tell you exactly, you're going to start as first captain. Then after so many years or so much time in the airplane, then you can move up to captain. And then once you're in a captain position, that can, get you in the situation of moving from a regional to a major airliner. And then you kind of start that over. So there are paths. It's pretty clear, I would say, after the time building and training. There's not a lot of information out there that gives you a really clear, definite pathway of going through training, time building, all the way up to airliners. That's what we're trying to change here at Utah Aviate. We're trying to give you a little bit more clear expectations of what you're getting into. So yeah, go back to my question that I always get is it worth getting into aviation? Yes, I think it is 100% worth getting into aviation if that's something that's, that you desire to be and have wanted to be for a long time. So is it for everybody though? That's another question I get am I capable of becoming a pilot? Going to tell you right now, it is not for everybody. Piloting is very difficult to get into. It's a lot of money to get into, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of dedication to get through the process. Just considering private pilot certificates, it's 40 hours of flight training. You're probably going to go through about 50 to 100 hours of ground training with an instructor or online. And from my experience as being an instructor, if you're not doing it consistently, yeah, you start regressing. So it's a lot of time that you have to put into it in order to make it through it just in general. And then there's just a lot of skills on top of it that not everybody has, in my experience. Just the learning of the controls of the airplane to the decision making and the situations that could arise while in the airplane. If you're not good at stress management, it's not going to be a fun time for you to be in the airplane. So, um, yes, it's definitely not for everybody. I think a lot of people can get into it, especially at kind of the lower level of being a private pilot or an instrument pilot. But you got to put a lot of you know thought into it and really know what you're getting yourself into. So, I think like they said, 14,000 new pilots each year. I would say it's probably 50% more than that get into piloting and don't make it out or don't finish their training. So yeah, those are kind of the two main questions that I get asked. It's nice that we can, find statistics on all of those things in order to show people exactly what's happening in aviation and exactly what's happening in the career fields. Hopefully, in the next couple weeks, we're going to have an airline pilot on with us, and he can go in a little bit more depth on that and like kind of the steps once you get to your 1,500 hours and what you can expect as kind of the life of a pilot. Because, being a flight instructor or running Utah Aviate, very different from being an airline pilot. I did about 1,000 hours of instructing prior to this, and I would say that life is just kind of working your 9 to 5. It's a lot of flying, a lot of teaching, and some scary moments in the airplane. I think it's fun. I love teaching people. It's a great time. But in terms of like a long-term career, that's I think once we get airline pilot on with us, they can go in a little bit more depth of what that looks like. So, but I would like to talk a little bit more about flight training with Utah Aviate. Um, I don't think my goal for this podcast isn't, it's to help promote Utah Aviate, but not necessarily go into too much about what we do day to day. But you know, for the first podcast, I think it's appropriate. The flight training with Utah Aviate, my opinion, probably a little bit biased, is we are great. I'd say we're one of the best flight schools in Utah. We do things slightly different from the other schools. We try to operate like your bigger schools that you see out there, but we being kind of a smaller flight school gives us a little bit added benefits to the student. So, a few of those benefits, one being down in Nephi, we're away from a lot of the major traffic that you'll see up in, some other cities or some other airports. So, our training area is right in our backyard. It takes us 5 minutes to take off and fly to that area. And we've got all the space to ourselves, basically, and very little people out there. So, that's a benefit. When you're doing your takeoff and landing phase of training, we do it right here at Nephi, and we can, it doesn't ever get super busy where we're kicked out of the area or have to watch out for a million aircrafts. We can kind of do what we need to. So basically, every minute of you being in the airplane is a training situation. So and then part of that where we really work on the effectiveness of our training and getting each student through as quick but as efficiently as we can. We're not held by any basically like time benchmarks of training. We don't have like we set goals for each of our students of when they want to get done, and then we try to tailor our training to that. But unlike other places that you may find, we don't have hard set times of like, okay, by this many hours you need to have soloed, or by this many hours you need to be at your check ride. I think, in my opinion and my instructing that I've done in the past, every student is very different. Some people learn really quick at the beginning. Some people learn very quick at the end. You might get held up at landings, or you might get held up at cross countries, or, in a lot of situations, it's the ground school that holds students back, and we need to push them a little bit harder to learn the knowledge base. The flying goes great, but the knowledge base really isn't there too much. So, every student's different. We might need to spend more time on one subject and not as much time on another subject. So, but we're very customizable in terms of how we teach and the timeline of what we teach it on, or where we teach it. So another thing that we really strive for here at Utah Aviate is our safety. Like I said, I already talked about kind of the stats on, what you see in the aviation industry of accidents and, incidences that happen in the airplane. Safety is our top priority at Utah Aviate. So one, we really want safe airplanes. So we do have some newer airplanes. They're meticulously maintained by our mechanic. We go through all the inspections and all the recommended, upkeep items. And they're relatively new. So right now we have the Diamond DA40. It's fully loaded with all the new avionics, which I think is beneficial in itself, where everything's moving to, uh, new technology every year. So why learn something super old? You can learn something new and updated. And that comes with a lot of other safety features. Like we have traffic awareness. We can track our fuel better. We can watch out for weather, formations, and try to avoid those. We got terrain here in Utah. Obviously, we got all the mountains everywhere. And yeah, the terrain itself, the terrain awareness on our screens helps us a ton in avoiding those. So there's safety there. And then all of our instructors are, they go through their own training with me, or with one of our other instructors on how to properly, fly the airplane, how to properly teach the students. And then, we work as a team. So if a student's struggling on something, we can all give input on how to help them, or if we need to put in additional flights with them with another instructor, or if I need to jump in the airplane with them. We work on all of those things, to make sure each of our students are safe. So now with training, you're a new person or you're a new pilot, you're very unfamiliar with an airplane. There will be times where you might get yourself into a little scary situation. I've been in plenty of them. It can be, that's where your skills as an instructor kick in order to make sure you get out of that situation, unharmed, and we're okay as the pilots, and then the airplane's okay structurally. So I'll probably over the next, course of, episodes, we'll go over some of the situations I've been in as a pilot, whether alone or with students. I've got quite a few, and at this point, they're just good stories and I can laugh at them now. But in the situation, it's one of those oh crap moments. So another thing with doing your flight training with Utah Aviate, we are substantially lower cost than a lot of other flight schools out there. So even though we fly nicer airplanes and the per hour on the plane is a little bit more, I think because of how we teach efficiently and the other training equipment that we have, we're able to keep that overall cost at a minimum. Like I said, the average is about 90,000 to 120, 140,000 for flight training. I think we're probably sitting on average probably around 86, 87,000 total to get from private to commercial. So, we're below the national average, which is nice. So, and then going to the equipment that we have, I already mentioned the airplane that we have, and we plan on getting, better and nicer airplanes for our students to fly. We also have a fully approved AATD, which is Advanced Training Device, Aircraft Training Device Simulator. So it's by Noble. It's an awesome simulator. Basically, what it allows us to do is we can count a lot of hours in the sim towards one of the ratings that you're seeking. So do 3 towards private. We can do 20 hours towards your instrument. We can do 50 hours towards your commercial. So that helps keep cost really low, but also just the training environment alone is super beneficial. So we're able to push play or push pause on the sim and go over a little bit more detail of what we're trying to convey, the training that we're trying to convey. And it's just a little bit better training environment for the more complicated topics that you will learn throughout your training. So we also have some time building airplanes. There's just a little light sport airplane that we have that is super low cost. It's as low as $100 an hour for that airplane to just go cruise around, time build, and get towards your 250 or your 1500 hours. So, um, and then our instructors, we've got really great instructors. We'll have them on the podcast so they can tell you about their experience with Utah Aviate, but also with just the training structure altogether and what it's like going through the aviation career route. But they're great. They're trained really well. They've worked hard on building an efficient syllabus, and they work really well with their students, and it helps provide a cheaper route of flight training where you're not having to reteach a lot of things because of the lack of instructor experience. Now, I'm not going to keep this podcast super long, but some expectations that we have for future podcasts episodes. I plan on keeping these probably around like 2 to 3 hours each, especially the interview ones, because I don't think each topic can be talked about in a 45 to an hour, time frame. I think all of them, there's a lot of good information that we can get from a lot of these people. So some expectations that we have. I want to get Scott on. He's my partner with Utah Aviate. He's owned a lot of airplanes, obviously gone through flight training himself. Um, we'll have him on. We're going to have airport or airplane owners on, probably some airplane managers on, airport managers. We're going to, have airline pilots. One of the big ones I'm excited for is we plan on having some DPEs, or, the FAA examiners for the testing for the pilot's licenses. We plan on having them on so we can ask them questions, dive a little bit more into their process on how they grade students or how they grade pilots on different check rides and what they expect, or how you can prepare a little bit better for a check ride. So I'm really excited about them. As well as we're going to have instructors on. We're going to have some students on so you can see their struggles that they have, and some things that they really enjoy, some things that they don't enjoy. So you can kind of see the full scope of the flight training in general. And then obviously we're going to have some other aviation professionals. I want to have on jump school pilots or jump school owners, glider pilots, military pilots. We're going to have our mechanic on, probably some other aircraft mechanics. And then basically everybody in the aviation industry, it'd be nice to get some aircraft salespeople on or salesmen on. They can talk about their experience of selling aircrafts because a lot of them are pilots as well. So it's kind of cool to see what planes they like. And then I also plan on doing some showcases of different kind of airplanes. Because we have the Diamond, we hope to get a Cirrus, we've got the Remos, we hang her with some experimental airplanes. And then, so basically, every new airplane that we can get in here, we'll show what the airplane looks like, how, the different types of benefits you can get for flying this airplane versus another airplane. So that'll be really fun to do with the airplanes. And then we're also going to do some training events. So we'll have some cockpit views of what we train, how we train it, so you can see what it's like being in the airplane, as well as showcasing our simulator that we have and the ground sessions that we do with each student as well. So, and then as we upload these, if you guys want to see any specific content, a specific aviation related, or if you have questions that we can get answered, you can put them in comments, you can DM me, you can send me texts, find us on our website. And then, we'd love to touch base on what other aviation enthusiasts want to hear. So just a few other items. So one, obviously, go subscribe. We're going to be on YouTube. We're going to be on Spotify. We got to get all that set up to upload to. And, we'll have links on our website, on our social media page. Find us on Instagram and Facebook, Utah Aviate. Pretty easy. And then we're going to have our merch shop. So if you want to get some Utah Aviate hoodies, shirts, hats, whatever you want, we're going to have it on there. We're coming up with some cool different logo ideas for the t-shirts. But that's Utah Aviate, myshopify.com. So you can go on there. Everything that we sell is going to go in to help, produce more products, better training events, better podcast material, getting people on. So, just going to the merch shop alone helps us out a ton. And then, who doesn't like some hoodies and some hats? So, but yeah, thanks for joining us. And next week, we're going to have Scott on as our first guest. So, yeah, have a good day, everybody.